Hi, everyone, and welcome to tonight's virtual event with Brookline Booksmith featuring Evan Schwartz for his book Revolver in conversation with Concord Free Press. My name is Bree, and I'm the Assistant Events Director at Brookline Booksmith in Brookline, Mass. If you're familiar with our store, welcome back, and if this is your first time hearing about us, welcome. We're very happy to have you all join our community this evening. We appreciate your support of the author and independent bookstore through your purchase and attendance. The chat and Q&A box are open, so feel free to make use of those. Remember to set your chat to all panelists and attendees so that you can see what everyone else in the audience is saying. And please drop your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. The chat can move pretty quickly at times, and we don't want to lose any questions. Please note that Brookline Booksmith has a strict policy against abusive behavior and language, and at our discretion, any attendee can be removed from an event for partaking in such behavior. Tonight, we are joined by Stona Fitch, founder of the Concord Free Press and author of Dark Horse, Give and Take, and 6 more novels. Concord Free Press publishes free books. All they ask in return is that you donate to a charity of your choice and pass along the book when you're done so that others can enjoy and donate. And like I said just a few seconds ago, if you haven't requested your copy of Revolver yet, you can do so at the event page where you registered or at the Concord Free Press website. Author Evan Schwartz started out reviewing rock concerts for his high school newspaper on Long Island. A longtime resident of Brookline, he's held readings and events for all of his books here at Brookline Booksmith, and we're so excited to be welcoming him back tonight. Evan is the author of the acclaimed historical narratives Finding Oz and The Last Lone Inventor. In Revolver, Evan's debut novel, 2 star-crossed high school lovers from Long Island go on a mystical journey in the late 1970s that take them deep into the heart of rock and roll and put them on a collision course with their hero, John Lennon. Suspenseful, funny, and emotional, Revolver deftly combines a coming-of-age story and a deep dive into rock history, and an exploration of the power of music, all set to a soundtrack of the breakthrough albums of the era. And I've heard a rumor that there may be a Spotify playlist if you hang around until the end of the event. So with that, I'll turn it over to Evan and Stona.
That's great.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having us. We've done events with Brookline since the very start of the Concord Free Press, and they've always been fantastic. And this is our first online one, so thanks for making it happen. We're really proud of this book. As you can see right here, Revolver, Evan Schwartz's first novel, but it's not his first book. And I'm going to start out with a line of questioning that's more about writing than about this specific book. You've written 5 successful nonfiction books, Evan. What made you turn to writing a novel?
Well, in nonfiction, I had written about innovation, creativity, did a book about the history of television, the birth of television, the creation of The Wizard of Oz. And I wanted to write about music next. It's the thing I love the most. I started out as a writer, writing about music. But it's hard to write about music. It really is. There was that quote, I think Elvis Costello said it, that writing about music is like dancing about architecture. Just doesn't quite capture the power of it. And so I started thinking of ways I don't want to write about music because it's been so well covered, inside stories about rock stars or musical criticism. So I thought about a novel and making it autobiographical and the time of music that I know best and love best, which was high school. So I started thinking about writing a rock and roll high school type novel. And that was how I started out. And it was also during the time, 4 years ago, we can remember, everyone was talking about this theme of unity versus division, right? That we're still hearing about every day. And
really,
I think we are. We're gonna not talk about that stuff tonight because this is like an escape from it. But I thought it was kind of funny that in high school, we were Well, these days, everyone loves this music that we're going to talk about tonight. 40 years later, 50 years later, people are still listening to this amazing music. But in high school, we used to fight about it, rock versus disco and punk and metal. We used to identify with a certain type of music, and the divisions were musical. They weren't really political. We never really even thought about politics back then. So I thought it would be a good theme to explore. And so it was really those two reasons, writing about music and bringing in this theme.
And clearly with fiction, the big bucks, the big money, right?
Oh, of course.
And the Concord Free Press, where we don't pay you, so you don't have to worry about that stuff. Are there specific books, novels that either feature music or that focus on it that you consider a good influence? Is there anything that you had in mind when you were writing this? It doesn't necessarily have to be about music, but other novels and works that you admire.
Yeah, I love Nick Hornby and High Fidelity and all his books. And I think he's been one of the best writing about music. But I also love novels like A Visit from the Goon Squad, Jennifer Egan, which, made me cry at the end. And that's very hard to do. I don't usually cry at the end of novels. And so it's sort of that emotional journey where music is intertwined.
Yeah. That seems good. And that I think that music is front and center in here, but it's also got a strong plot line that is about, people, not just music. So that's
exactly
part of the strength of this book.
Yeah, exactly. As we talked about, what I wanted to do is talk about how music actually changes people. People identify with it. It changes your behavior on a day-to-day basis. So it's not just referring to the music, but it's intertwined with the plot. So I love stories like Almost Famous or School of Rock, where they really do it, where rock and roll is really part of the story, not just in the background.
Okay, cool. And in terms of, just briefly for the writers that are in the audience, how did you did a lot of time in workshops and sort of took that approach to writing a novel. Can you talk a little bit about how you made the switch from nonfiction to fiction by using by mentors and by working with workshops?
Yeah, writing is a pretty hard process, pretty lonely. And I found it was much less lonely when you're in the room with other people who are going through it and who are also writing their first novel. And I started out with pages at the Martha's Vineyard Institute of Creative Writing, and just incubating pages there, reading pages. And I felt I had maybe 10 good pages, and that's what you needed to submit to the Grub Street Novel Incubator, which is a 9-month program at the Boston Writing School, Grub Street. And that was a lot of fun. We might have a few people from the workshop here today, but you're going through a weekly meeting that's 3 hours and trying to generate 10 pages per week, while most people have full-time jobs. So this, at the end of the 9 months, I had, over 400 pages. So it took out the loneliness, and you're getting all kinds of feedback from people. So it's fun.
That sounds incredible. That sounds a lot better than just, hiding in your room and typing away. Not that I do that, but it seems like you learned a lot from these mentors. Anybody you want to mention? Anybody you want to thank? People that were helpful along the way?
Well, yeah, I think at Grub Street, Annie Hartnett was the instructor, and she was amazing. And she really, she's into like really weird books. Like we studied this book, Swamplandia, during this time, and that's a strange book. And her book, Rabbit Cake, is very strange. So I thought this is good because my book's going to be pretty weird too. It's going to be just, I think, different. And I thought, that might be a thing to strive for. I did a lot of revisions at the workshops in Provincetown, the Provincetown Fine Arts Work Center. And these are summer workshops that last for a week. So you're living out on the Cape for a week with, and going to these daily workshops and then doing some writing for a few hours a day. And Andre Dubas is an amazing writer. He was the instructor, the author of House of Sand and Fog. And he was so helpful because what I was doing was these dueling narrators. So people who've read the book know that it alternates between Charlie and Shayla, the two teenagers. And that is something that is, was hard to do. That's like the core of the book, right? But he did something similar with House of Sand and Fog, where he had, if you've seen the movie, the Ben Kingsley character is writing, narrating in the first person, present tense. And the Jennifer Connelly character is narrating her parts in the first person past tense. And that's a sort of a technique I thought really worked well, because you could have one character who knows more. And so I have Shayla pushing back on Charlie because she knows what's going to happen because she's looking back on it. He's looking forward in real time.
I think that's one of the elements that when we first saw your manuscript that we were so impressed with, was the ability to pull off, a rotating set of two narrators, two different voices, which is hard to do. I certainly never tried it. And it works. It's a fantastic thing. I won't, no spoilers here, but it does have one of the best endings that I've read in years. So all that work paid off. And let's move from talking about writing to talking a bit about music, and then we'll go directly into hearing a bit from you, from your book. Evan, I know you fairly well. I know that you're a huge Beatles fan. I think anybody that reads your book will realize that you're a huge music and Beatles fan, like Charlie and the main character in the book, one of them. Could you tell us when you really became a music fan? Was it something that you started out with when you were very young? Did you have music around your house as a kid, or was it something you had to seek out at the record store, like some of us had to? Just give us a little bit about your relationship with music, starting when you were born and then working its way up. Thanks.
When I was born, okay. Well,
What's the first song you remember, Evan?
I was in the womb when the Beatles played Ed Sullivan.
Yeah.
So that's true. My mom was, I think, 7 months pregnant in February of somewhere around there, right?
Yeah.
1964 was when they played, right? So I was born in April 64. So I like to think that, what's the word for when you're in the womb?
In vitro? You were in vitro? In utero. In utero.
In utero.
Not vitro.
That was in Nirvana.
In utero.
Yeah, so I'd like to think that I heard that. And the radio, when I was a kid, I remember hearing Beatles songs on the radio. My parents were not into music, this kind of music. My dad was more like into Sinatra, and my mom was into Barbra Streisand. I got into the Beatles, like everyone else, maybe I was 12 or so when I started buying their albums. The cool thing is, I still have their albums, the ones I actually bought. So,
Whoa, collector's items.
These albums are, they're timeless albums, right? And
yeah,
this is one of the very first albums I ever bought. when I was 13, and it's the exact copy. And it still sounds good. This one, the cover's not great. Okay.
I guess that's the White Album.
Yeah. So I just love these albums. And I remember thinking, speaking of the White Album, I remember the song Revolution. That was one of my favorite Beatles songs, and how you could learn a little about history from these songs. So this is like a defining song of 1968. I was too young to remember 1968, but John Lennon had this whole view of what protesting was and revolution was that was very sophisticated. He wasn't necessarily endorsing it or saying or going against it. He had a very comical and powerful and sophisticated view of it. And I thought, wow, that's, and you can go into almost any Beatles song and it's spurred, entire bands. So I loved how every band that I was into goes back to the Beatles. You could, you listen to all the rock stars today. They all have these Beatles stories, how they were influenced. So really powerful stuff. And that's how it started, I think.
Yeah. Well, I've a question though.
Beatles, Stones.
With your records, okay? I mean, this is something the pre-internet music listening. It's sort of like in the film Moonrise Kingdom, where kids just sat in the attic and listened to the same record over and over because they had one record. I always remember like trying to decipher like a record like Sgt. Pepper by studying the liner notes and everything. I mean, anything you could read and glean from it. They seem to be such mysteries and such, so much information. And before the internet, you couldn't get the lyrics. You had to sort of figure it out or read it from the lyric sheet, and you didn't have all the context. Did you find yourself spending sort of a scholarly amount of 14-year-old time studying your Beatles records?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look at this, right?
Who
Everyone
are these people?
tried to identify who was in the picture. I spent hours, like when I was listening to the records, I would read the liner notes, just over and over, memorize everything. There was nothing else to do. You couldn't surf the web, right? So
it's very different when you have to discover these things, by yourself. And then eventually you find other people that have been doing the same thing. Like someone just said here, I did that too all the time. Yeah, we all did it because, like you said, there was no other way to do it. But then eventually you'd meet someone else who had done the same thing. And that's, I guess, how the internet was born, right? Two people chatting. And then eventually you get the big picture. But the work that used to have to go into listening to music, the sort of the getting of the record from the record store, the scraping together the $9 or whatever to buy it, and then coming home and dealing with your parents not liking it and having to hide in your room and listen to it. It was more of a process. I think you become so much more of a fan because you had to work at it, And do you think is that true, Evan? You had to work at it a bit?
It was special. I mean, I remember when this, coming from Long Island, I remember when this album came out, right? Such a blockbuster. And my dad was, just like the dad in the novel, he renovated bakeries and, restaurants as an architect. And he was renovating a record shop, and he said, I can get you a free record. Just tell me what record you want. And I couldn't find this one. So I requested this, and he brought this home for me. I still have it. The earlier Billy Joel album, which is incredible, right? And
so wait a minute, he could only get you one record, even though he was there all the time renovating. He couldn't lift a few more, bring them home in a suitcase.
So that's the thing about records. You consider them kind of rare.
Yeah, they were.
But one of the things that inspired parts of the story were real things that happened, and a lot of the real things that happened, sort of close brushes with rock stars, and other real stories that I wrote as scenes, I ended up cutting out because they didn't fit in the final novel. But one of them that did fit is the story I tell of when I'm working in Food Town in the dairy aisle during high school, basically to earn minimum wage so I could buy albums. If you worked for 2 hours, you could buy one album because it was about $3 an hour, and an album cost $6, right? So I had stared at the back of this album so much that when this guy was shopping in Food Town, he came down the dairy aisle, Liberty DeVito, who lived in the hometown of Massapequa. And I was stocking ricotta cheese, and I was like, Liberty DeVito shopping in my aisle. And I stopped him, and we had a conversation. And he was surprised someone recognized the drummer, you know? And so I felt it paid off, all the hours reading
Of study. Did he buy anything did he buy something from the dairy aisle?
Yeah, he was making lasagnas for the band because they were home on their tour. So I the way I remember it, I gave him tips on making lasagna. And
Damn. You basically made dinner for Billy Joel.
Yes. Dinner for Billy and the band.
Good for you. Okay, so other bands that, I mean, obviously the Beatles were critical, but bands that you saw live or that were early things that you listened to, that this will lead us into the book more, but other of that era, what were some of your other favorites?
Are we seeing the screen now?
I am not.
Okay, let me do a share screen because I have some images that we could check out. Okay, so do we have it here? We have an image here. Okay.
We do.
Okay.
It is of some media.
So I thought this was fun to talk about the generations, right? But some of the bands, this is the typewriter that I would type on writing concert reviews. And
The Achiever.
Yeah, Underwood Achiever.
Wow.
And I bought a copy of it on eBay. So this is
It's better than the Underachiever, the one that didn't sell as well.
So in those days, like one of the concerts that we would go, I started out writing concert reviews. I think the first one was a Grateful Dead concert. I would do Pink Floyd, Springsteen, and that's how it all started. But sometimes it was mostly arena rock, like Nassau Coliseum or Madison Square Garden. And then later it was going into the city to see a band like The Clash. They played on Broadway in 1981 at this very small theater, and a video recently surfaced, and those are some of the pictures. So it just gives you a sense of what it was like in those days. And in New York City, if you were a kid who loved music, you're just drawn like moth to flame.
And how old were you when you're going into the city to see these big shows?
I was started when I was 14. I think the first show that I saw was I wanted to see Billy Joel in December of 1978, which referred to in the book. And I went with some friends. We didn't have tickets because it was so sold out. And I remember my dad drove me in, and a friend of mine, we had to go into an alley to buy from a scalper. And we thought, $20, that's really not bad, because the tickets were, $11, $12. So we buy the scalp tickets and we take it to the gate, and they say these are fake tickets. So we were scammed. We had to go back into the alley and find someone else, and pay $30 for real tickets.
Oh man, that's unfair to kids to rip you off. But you must have been a little bit of an easy mark.
First time in the city, 14 years old. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe 15.
Did you go to smaller clubs that later on, when you got a little bit older, go to any of the sort of the classic sort of New York clubs of the time?
Yeah, I would go to CBGB's,
Yep.
so the Tom Tom Club there. Sometimes shows like the Roseland Ballroom had shows.
Right.
I saw B-52s there where you're standing up and dancing to the B-52s in the early days. It's just incredible stuff.
Right.
You went to a lot of those clubs, right?
Okay. Right. Yeah. Yes, definitely. We played at CBGB's. It was grottier than people make it out to be. It's actually even grottier than it's been portrayed. Just put it that way.
So that people know, Stona is an 80s rocker, 80s, 90s.
Yeah. We'll say 80s. Yeah, that works.
80s.
Yeah, it's not the only reason I liked your book. But it's I do have an affinity to music, and I know some of the locales. I don't know Long Island at all, but I do know the places you're talking about. And one of the things you and I talked about, because even though, of a certain age, the music of the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones and even on Talking Heads and stuff that's now approaching, not ancient history, but it's older. Do you think that is there a common knowledge of that era? Because it was a special time in music and there was so much going on. Do you think it's something that people who are, in high school now, would they recognize, the bands we're talking about in the book?
I think so. I think this music has really transcended time and people are still listening to it. It's still, all these artists are hugely popular on Spotify in the top of the list. And you just see it every,
Right.
I was at the Billy Joel concert at Fenway Park, just a few years ago, and there was an 11-year-old kid who was there with his parents. This was his birthday present, and he was singing every word to every Billy Joel song. So you just see that. I've seen that at Steely Dan shows. You see all the ages, and sometimes it gravitates towards people our age, but it's definitely living on.
Right. I'm actually allergic to Billy Joel. I got tested, and I have to really watch out because I break out into hives.
Well, you didn't grow up on Long Island.
No, apparently not. And I never had dinner with him. So before we get to reading from your book, I wanted to find out a little bit more about, the playlist you put together, and I want to plug it. There is a Revolver Spotify playlist that is available and that Evan has curated. That's not just the Beatles. It's a lot of the bands we're just talking about. So if some of this sounds mysterious to you and you're younger, well, this playlist pretty much runs you through it. And it's I believe 4.5 hours of listening pleasure. So a long drive, a long meditative walk in the woods, whatever, you got it, right? How did they find it? Is it linking right now?
Yeah, I'm going, I could do that right now, actually.
Yeah.
Send you the Spotify
In the
playlist
notes?
in the chat box. So I'm sending it to all panelists and attendees right here. Is that
Hey, there you go.
people?
Good job. Yay.
Yeah, it's like 90 songs,
Yeah,
it's 4.5 hours of music.
You've done a great service for the team. Thank you.
Yeah, it's in the order.
Now we've talked about writing. It's in the what?
It's in the order of the story.
It's in the order of the novel?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's you'll have to turn the pages in time with the music, right?
Mm-hmm.
You'll get it. Anyway, so we've talked about music. We've talked about your childhood. We've talked about lasagna. and writing workshops. What I'd like to turn to now is the reason a lot of people are here is to hear a little bit more from the actual book, Revolver. And if you have a section you'd like to read, please do.
Okay.
Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, just to set it up a little, I'm going to share a screen for another image. You see this? So.
Oh, yeah, the snow, the 78.
Yes. So the blizzard of 78, the book really starts in that month, February 1978. So this is Charlie's voice. And he and Shayla have already met in social studies. And this is the first time they're going to see each other outside of school. I watch from my bedroom window as the snow falls to snaps of lightning and crashes of thunder. I'm in my sweats and tube socks, wondering if the flakes can hear the music. Maybe from the way they all zag and flurry. My pain has released, but I'm left with the aches as the skies throw down an inch every 10 minutes. The news is calling it the Great Blizzard of 78, Storm of the Century. The entire Northeast buried by a low-pressure monster. All flights grounded, cars covered. One of the houses across the street slips under a 12-foot drift. I spend the hours with my compact stereo blasting. I'm tending to my albums, mostly Who, Zepp, Beatles, Stones. 4 pillars can hold me up through anything. This is how I drifted through my years of regeneration. Cloistered like a musical monk, the music repairing and rewiring me. It's referring to an injury that Charlie had during childhood. It may look pretty boring, but I need to do what I do. I have to thumb through the spines to find the airship of Led Zeppelin II. I must flip it open, stare at the inside cover, the golden blimp, my cardboard shrine. The day after the snow stops, the streets are plowed. I'm in my parka, wool New York Giants hat, gloves from Grant's department store. I pry open the front door and come face to face with a white wall of fluff. I duck my head and break on through to the other side. I dig out my plastic disc saucer and step out from my stoop to barrel down the block, my rubber boots crunching through the whiteness. The sun keeps its distance behind this blinding street canyon. I fall into formation, joining a brigade of kids from school. Everyone is unrecognizable in parkas and scarves, blocking faces from the wind, red shields strapped to arms. We converge over a country mile, swishing through the pristine park, collecting at the highest hill. In every direction, treetops jut from the pale piles. We're all on equal footing in this quiet world. No one can see my scars. Within earshot of about 30 of us, a Robert brother shouts, "Okay, people, who's up for some strip sledding?" Strip sledding, what's that? And where's Shayla from social studies? You shed an item of clothing at the start of every lap down the slope, announces another Robert brother. The first 10 finishers claim a prize, adds a third, hoisting a clear plastic bag containing 10 bright orange carrots. The fourth Robert brother continues with the rules of play. Each entrant must blaze their own lane and stay in their own lane. This is not the plan. I'm not taking off my clothes. Not here, not now. The cold isn't the matter. Item number 1, off, a Robert hollers. Everyone begins by unraveling their scarves. I spot the eyes of Shayla Hazlett in the next lane. "Hi, Charlie," she says in a puff of peppermint breath. "Are you ready?" "Oh, hi, Shayla." My nerves spike knowing she's next to me. Ready as I'll ever be. We face down the slope. My mind whites out as the 7-beat riff from Whole Lotta Love shoots off like a madman in my head. So that's,
Strip sledding. That's a concept for you.
yes.
Crazy kids these days coming up with that stuff.
Um,
Did you actually go strip sledding, Evan?
that really happened. That really happened in our town.
What's with Long Island? What is with it?
Well, you know, Long Island is a really interesting place, and I know we have some on the Zoom with us today. So I'd like to
Yes.
go to a few pictures from Long Island. And our high school, do you see this here? Okay. This is the Massapequa Railroad station that's referred to a lot in the book because Shayla and Charlie are always going into the city. The biggest landmark in Massapequa is the All-American Burgers, Shakes, and Fries restaurant.
Frank's.
Yep. And essentially, it's been the same. You can go there today and it's the same, and the prices are the same. So it's like a prototypical 50s town that was built in sort of the Eisenhower era, but went through a lot of changes in the 70s. And what happened is people were really into their bands, and there was a wall next to the high school where people would write all their graffiti. And this is another episode in the book and really gets to the division versus unity. They would misspell a lot of the bands. Zeppelin, Leonard Skinner, they wouldn't really get it. They just leave out a vowel, just get a few things wrong. And
Nice, nice typeface though. I think that's Stoner Bold.
yes.
Yeah.
And I just love it. This is like a yearbook picture. So this is 1978. This is what the kid, you know, this is what I had in mind. You know, I don't get too descriptive in the book because you could
That's it.
you know, a few details brings you back, but this is really the way it was.
Wow. That's
So
a whole other era, a whole other place.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and this is the wall mural that was painted on that wall so they could mask the graffiti. And this happened while we were in high school. And the wall mural has been changed over the years, but there's still a mural there. And it was funny. I got a message from someone from high school who I wasn't actually friends with, but I remember him a little bit. And he says he was president of the senior class after me, and he started the wall mural contest, which is referred to in the book.
Was your mascot the bat or something? What is that thing? The bat, the
No.
Batman figure on the left.
What happened is they allowed the kids to vote on what they wanted on the wall mural, but there was no
bad idea.
except a lot of kids voted Batman. They wanted Batman, so the administration said, okay, you could have Batman, as long as we have sort of school spirit kind of images for other stuff.
All right, so you got to use the insensitive Indian image as well. Good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're talking about your high school experience, but you and I talked about this before, that there is sort of a universal experience for people in junior high and high school. And even if someone didn't have and I didn't have your high school experience, you know, just reading about that time, there seems to be such common themes of, you know, working on your identity, figuring out who you are, trying to fit in. You know, what do you think of what holds true now to anyone that's in high school, you know, listening to music, doing what they do, even though some of the surface things would be different than what you did? What are the common themes that you see?
Well, I think you hit on identity as a big one. It's when you're in high school, you're figuring out who you are, right? And a lot of this self-discovery could be when you discover the music that you love. And I think that's still going on. I read a YA novel that was set in the not too recent past, and these two kids, loved this. They turned out they loved the Smiths. I think took place in the 90s, and back then, that was very rare. You wouldn't find other kids who would be into the Smiths, and for us, it was Talking Heads or the Clash, and essentially it was exciting in real time to discover this music, because basically in the general listening population, the 0% of people were listening to Talking Heads and the Clash. It was not on commercial radio. So
Right.
that was fun, and people identified. You'll see, people who've read the book know that my take on the typical school cliques, the jocks and the brains and the burnouts. Instead, what I have are the Fleetwood Macs and the sick metal mofos, and the groups really break down into the bands they're crazy about. And
Okay.
they start to look like them, and the Skinnerds. So that's really the conceit, and it's a way of bringing out conflict.
Got it. Yeah, of course. I mean, it'd be pretty easy to spot the Skinnerds.
Mm-hmm.
They'd be so Skinnerdy. Do you consider Revolver a YA novel?
That's a good question. The good thing with Concord Free Press is you don't have to put it in a box, right?
No, you don't. Doesn't have to get shelved there.
But I think it's a hybrid.
I agree.
The kids in the story are young, so it has the makings of a YA novel, but I'd like to think, with the narration, and the historical fiction, that it's great for people who are older too. So I hope it bridges, the
Definitely.
two.
Well, one of the things I admired is that you didn't do the thing a lot of novelists do, which is have younger characters, but they suspiciously sound like a lot older characters, that they're just puppets for what would have been older characters, or maybe some of the author's ideas. I feel like Shay and Charlie are, clearly of the era they're in, and their voices, resonate with that time, and they're different enough that you can sort of spot their unique personalities. And it's not about sort of ladling on ideas or anything else that the author wants to put in their mouth. So it's really them. They seem very authentic, and I think that was one of the comments that Andre Dubus made, was just that the characters are as real as people I know, as he says, and they are. They're fantastic. We're going to segue briefly into a little bit about why you chose to publish with the Concord Free Press. Then we'll take questions from the people. But first of all, I mean, this is our 15th book. We've been doing this for about 12 years. People who want to know more about the Concord Free Press, it's just concordfreepress.com. What we do is simple. We publish books, as up front you learned, for free, and give them away for free, mail them for free. And all we ask is that people give money to something they care about, help somebody in need, and then pass the book on so others can do the same. Over the last 12 years we've been doing this, we've generated about $3.7 million in generosity. And that's, not to us, but to all sorts of causes. If you look at our site, you'll see them. And up front, Evan, you and I were talking about how this is a strange day to be talking about something like music. And I think it's, given that the current events are darker and stormier, but I actually think it's a great time to remember that, there's nothing funny about peace, love, and understanding, as they say, as Nick Lowe said. And it's a good time to think like that a little more generosity couldn't hurt, of spirit and just of any way of being generous. So basically, Concord Free Press is about generosity. And I know that when you found out about us, that might have been one of the things that attracted you to it. But you can tell me, why did you publish with such a weird press?
Well, I love the mission, and I heard about it living in Concord. I saw your sign out front and your parking spots, and I've seen your books, and at the library, and and you publish beautiful books. So it's a great way of getting a novel out there, because a novel is like any other product. It needs to have readers, and it needs to reach its audience. But sometimes with commercial publishers, you put a novel out there, it's super competitive. It takes sometimes 2 extra years to go through the agenting process and the publishing process at a major publisher. I've been through this 5 times with previous books. And I did, as you know, there was also a time dimension to it, because when we connected, I said, it would be great if we can get this book out for these anniversaries, John Lennon's 80th birthday and the 40th anniversary of the tragedy. I felt it also spoke to this time, this division versus unity time, that it's a book that I think tries to bring people together, that music is one of the only things we have left. Looking at the country more broadly, everyone loves this music, and we could find commonality and go to these concerts together. Hopefully they'll come back in 2021. So I wanted it for this moment, and going with the commercial publisher, it wouldn't have been this moment.
No, it's our approach is, we can move ahead, and since we're not, trying to make a profit, it really frees us from a lot of the, I admire commercial publishers, and I publish with them, but I think when you don't have to worry about, money, publishing becomes a lot more fun, and a lot, we can worry about the things we care about, the content, the book itself, working with the author. And speaking of design, each one of our books has been designed, even all the ones behind me, by our design director, Chris DiFrancesco, who does a fantastic job, because we learned something important early on. If you're going to give away a book for free, it has to be really good. Otherwise, people would just look at it and say, oh yeah, that's free. Just throw it in with the magazines in the magazine section. So we put a lot of work into making sure that we select books that we're proud of. We don't publish, we're not under pressure to publish, 20 books a year. We do 2 or 3 and on average, and they have to be a book that resonates with us, because we're all volunteers. It's a fully volunteer press. So everybody that works with us, from editors to proofreaders to advisory board members to people who help us mail the books out, it's a labor of love. So we're glad that you're on the team, Evan, and we'll never let you go. Pretty soon we'll have you doing all sorts of chores around here. It's just going to be a never-ending nightmare. It's going to be a nightmare for you.
I know you mail out the books, you send them out to the bookstores, right?
Yep. There's a lot of shipping and receiving that goes on. A lot of mailing. We're really popular with the post office.
Yeah,
anyway,
I'm glad you mentioned Chris about the cover design, because we have a few people asking about, who did it, and
yeah, Chris.
We linked to him on the website, so everyone can, everyone's part-time volunteers essentially, right? At the publisher, at the press.
Right. We all do other things. Most of us are writers, but there are a lot of other things that go on too.
Anyway. Another great thing about it is it's like a platform. If the book connects with an audience, then it can go on to another life with a commercial publisher later.
Exactly. And a lot of books have. I mean, for writers that are listening in, it's, it might seem strange to give away something you've worked on for 4 or 5 years, but you retain all the rights. And as you can see behind me, there's a book by Gregory Maguire that went on to a commercial edition. Give and Take, our first book, went on to commercial editions. A lot of those do, and that's just a second life that's commercial. We're not saying all books should be free. It's just ours. Start out as free books, and they can go on to something else. And is it only for novels? Someone is asking. No, we do short story collections. We've done a couple nonfiction things. It just has to be something that sort of would inspire generosity, is pretty much the criteria, and is a book that resonates enough with our team to want to put the work in to do it.
Now,
and a writer like Evan,
Bree, I
who
think
gets what we do.
Bree was going to come back and field some questions for us.
Yeah.
Great questions.
I think Bree is Bree there?
Yep, I'm back.
She was brought, there she is. You were asleep, weren't you? You were asleep. You can just tell us. It's
No,
okay.
not at all.
Okay.
I love getting the music events, especially in the past year with the, events being virtual and not being able to go to concerts. It brings me back to that feeling of community, and I just really want to go to shows again.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So on to the Q&A. Celine is wondering if you, Evan, or you, Stona, do either of you play an instrument? And if so, which ones?
Well, yes, I started playing guitar back at the beginning of high school and still do. So have been in some ill-fated band. But Stona has a much more illustrious rock and roll history, and I love his music.
That is debatable,
Yes.
Evan I. Schwartz. I think that at the end, we were going to ask you to do the ending of White Album solo on your guitar, if you don't mind, like just the last 10 minutes.
Right.
Okay.
This is going on YouTube, so don't get us a copyright ban.
So anyway, yes, I was in a band called Scruffy the Cat. It was a punk country band
I
out
kind
of
of love
Boston.
that.
Out of Boston, we played 750 shows in 5 years, roughly, and put out a bunch of records. Sony reissued our stuff, and I played the electric banjo, known as one of the fine rock instruments, and mandolin, guitar, accordion. Evan, I'll chip in on the accordion with the White Album thing.
Okay.
And anything you can buy at a pawn shop, I can pick it up and really suck at it.
No, Scruffy the Cat was great, says Randy.
Thanks, Randy.
And
You're a king. You're
and
a king.
also, I think you invented a genre of wasn't it called cowpunk?
Yeah, it was weird because I'm originally from Oklahoma, but I lived in Boston and at the time, and the band, we just looked like hicks in leather jackets, and other bands like Beat Rodeo or sort of country influenced bands. We played with the Los Lobos and the Blasters and toured with the Replacements. So it was a little bit of a country influence, but very loud. I played the banjo through a Marshall stack generally, which sounds really bad. And it's a learning experience. I definitely got the want to be a musician out of me, so I could sit down and write novels, which is a lot easier than being in a band.
Yes. No,
And it doesn't smell
our height
as
of,
bad.
our band played the senior variety show in high school and tried to cover Ramones. So that's the stage we were at.
That's good. That's a good stage to be at.
Excellent.
Yeah, once you have a band, it's all over.
Well, believe it or not, punk country is
Other questions?
exactly my genre, so I'm going to be looking up Scruffy the Cat. Evan,
Thank you. Our oeuvre.
did you review shows when you were in college too?
Yes, I reviewed shows for the newspaper. The Who was one of them. The Who and the Clash at Shea Stadium, I remember reviewing. But I also turned to a college radio. In college, that was like my fraternity. And I know we have some college radio folks here with us tonight who I worked with at the station.
College radio is so special. Those 3 a.m. shows that you just happen across that just become your favorite. I love it.
Yep. Claudia from WCDB is here with us. My first shows were 3 a.m. to 7 a.m.
You have to prove yourself, right? And before you can get prime time.
Yeah. And then you have an 8 a.m. class.
It builds character. That's character building.
So Teresa says, the book has some funny parts as well as serious ones. Was it fun to write, and did you listen to the music while you were writing it?
Good question.
Yes, I really did. I feel that music helps give me energy. I have it on usually in headphones, and I'm listening constantly to music over and over. Sometimes it's the music that I'm writing about. The book started out with devoting one chapter to an iconic album that influenced the plot in that chapter, and I started out with, I think, 36 chapters. I cut about half of them, but it really fueled it, and I felt this. I was really lucky because I was writing about music while listening to that music.
And when you listen to music when you're writing, do you find that, like, I tend to veer towards music that doesn't have a lot of lyrics involved? It's mostly like Stereolab, an instrumental band, because I find it distracting to hear words when I'm trying to write them as well. But can you listen to stuff that's got, like, I guess it's lyrics you know so well you probably don't even hear them in a funny way?
No, I hear them, but also it's a weird, maybe it's an ADD thing, but I found with previous books, I would write in coffee shops, and when people are talking, lots of chatter, I like that for some reason.
Wow.
I don't like to write in quiet.
Okay. Well, good. That's easier. It's easier to find a noisy place than a quiet one. So I think you're gonna love it. Yeah. Everybody has a different method.
Yeah. Jill says, I haven't finished yet, but Sona piqued my interest in the ending. Do you know the ending of the book while you're writing it?
Good question.
That's a great one. I was always writing in real time, covering the 3.5 years that the book takes place, starting in early '78. So I knew the tragedy of December 1980 would be towards the end of the story, and but I didn't know how it was going to come in, and I discovered the ending during the writing. So I think that's the best thing. I've talked to other writers. I didn't know the ending when I set out to write it, and I kind of discovered it.
That's great advice. I mean, I've heard a lot of my mentors always said you just have to have a general direction, but you don't have to know the exact destination. Because if it's not an exploration for you as the writer, then it's not one for the reader either. And if you spend too much time with note cards pinned to your wall, ending, beginning, middle, it becomes a lot less free. And but anyway, however you got there, the ending is terrific.
Well,
and whoever that was who's approaching it, yeah, that's the way to do it. It probably it's a tearjerker. It's fantastic. It's a really great ending. I don't say that about a lot of books. The endings are really hard. I mean, I think it's you did it. Anyway, other questions?
No, I think that's going to do it. Nope, we've got one last minute question. For you, Evan, what was the hardest part of the process writing this book?
The hardest part, the revisions and taking out, they say your darlings.
Kill your darlings.
Great material. I had 444 pages in my first draft, and I had to cut eventually half of that material. So I have about 200 pages. And it's painful because I was in love with some of this stuff and it didn't fit in. That was the hardest part.
Well, and your editor from the Concord Free Press, Ann Fitch, she had you make some changes too, but by the time it got to us, we were down to smaller implements than axes,
Yeah.
So you'd done a lot of the heavy lifting, I guess, with cutting.
All right. Thank you both so much. I'm so excited to read this book. It sounds fantastic. And I'll listen to the playlist while I do.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Jonah, Evan.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Brookline Booksmith.
Of course, anytime. We love working with you guys. Have a good night.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks very much.